my name's Jo Phillips of ReadyingRecruiters. The work that we do is we work specifically within the TA space. So I'm an executive coach, mentor, and an in-person classroom trainer. And what we provide is specialist training to in-house teams. And really the aim of it is to up-level those individual behaviours to ensure that talent teams can operate to global standards. In terms of my background and my experience, I'm now 25, nearly 30 years deep into the talent acquisition and recruiting arena. I've trained thousands of recruiters for both SMEs as well as corporates. And the work I do is all about helping to adapt the human behaviours to create the most positive experience for both candidates as well as for hiring managers. And somebody who is with me today is Amy Coleman, who knows all about the challenges that we have day by day. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Amy. Amy is a regional resourcing manager of DHL Supply Chain, and her team is responsible for delivering talent solutions for clients such as TK Maxx, Aston Martin, Sky, Selfridges, HMP, JLR, Dunelm. I mean, the list just goes on, doesn't it, Amy? And so it certainly does. And so it's my absolute pleasure to have you here, and thank you for being with me. And I guess what I was going to ask you, Amy, is really when it comes to some of the challenges that you see your team having at the moment, what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing?
Yeah, thanks, Jo. So yeah, we still see obviously the demands coming through thick and fast. Whilst we don't experience what we have traditionally seen in peaks and troughs, we see clients have immediate need, and we work as generalists as opposed to how we used to work as a specialised domain. And this obviously brings its own challenges. And as a team, we have to provide our recruiters with the knowledge and obviously confidence and skills to recruit across multiple sectors and the roles, and enable them to manage a variety of different hiring managers and their demands. And this takes a certain skill set. We have to create behaviours above and beyond the traditional transactional process. So we have to be able to influence and share our best practice and create a relationship with those hiring managers, which we are actually on that journey now.
I know that we were talking just before we went live in terms of the numbers of TA that you've got in your team at the moment. And I know that you'd mentioned that you've just allowed one to head off on secondment, leaving you with, how many did you say that you've got
I have
across?
Six now across the Midlands, well, West Midlands.
Okay, so 6 across the West Midlands, but with this set of criteria that is enormous, right, in terms of the brands that you're working with and their requirements. And I guess I was going to ask you really in terms of some of the pressures at the moment, are you finding that you just need to do more with less, and that's increasing daily?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, currently I've got sat live roles just before we came on, actually had a quick look, 153 vacancies. And within them vacancies, there's 230 roles. So with the 6 that I've got in my team at the moment, they're dealing with around 100 hiring managers for them roles, which they can be demanding, and obviously they're all different in their own ways.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that people at the other end are thinking, yeah, that's a vast number of roles, and relatively small team size in order to be able to create the velocity in terms of acquiring the talent. And one of the questions that I have, in fact, the first poll that I'd got for everybody who's the other end, was really just to find out what are the average number of roles that you're dealing with on a weekly basis. So be interested to know how many open and live positions you're dealing with a week. Is it 0 to 50? Is it 50 to 200? Or is it 200 plus? And just whilst you're considering that poll and considering answering those questions, I guess I just wanted to talk to the piece that's come up recently, and really just talk of it in a little bit of wider terms in terms of what's happening within the economy, and certainly in terms of the world of work. And I don't know how many people managed to see or managed to get hold of the World Economic Forum, the Future of Jobs report that came out in April. But what was interesting is that across just over 800 companies that were surveyed, and they employ something like just over 11.3 million people, 27 industries, 45 different economies. What was interesting is that they looked at the macro trends, and they looked at the impact of technology as we move forward between 2023 and 2027. And what's really interesting is I don't think we've ever seen I don't think we've ever seen so many changes so quickly within the world of work, or certainly within the world of jobs. And actually, some of the fastest growing roles are all tech related. They're AI and machine learning. They're around sustainability specialists, of course, and solar energy specialists, with the shift towards things like renewable energy. Really interestingly, and again, I'm sure this won't surprise people the other end, but really interestingly, some of the faster declining roles are things like the clerical, secretarial, bank clerks, postal service, ticket clerks, data entry. And interestingly, what we know is that the largest scale growth is actually going to come through education by about 10%. There'll be an additional 3 million roles within education. And funny enough, agriculture and actually agricultural equipment operators will increase by 30%. So if all else fails, we're just going to go and all learn to go and drive tractors, I guess. And another 4 million roles will be around this digital enablement piece. So let's see, just as I know, as you were thinking this through, let's see what were the responses to that. Okay, so nearly 70% of us are dealing somewhere between 0 and 50 roles a week. Interestingly, then, I'm also keen to find out across how many hiring managers are you managing a week, because we can manage small numbers as well as much higher numbers. But I'm interested to know the number of hiring managers, and then we're going to look at and really move in to start looking at some of the challenges that I'm sure that we all face. Just as you're doing that, I wanted to just again talk to some of those key points that the World Economic Forum report established. And interestingly, what we know is that in terms of the roles that will probably be non-existent or some of the largest losses, what we see is that actually there'll be something along 26 million roles by the time we hit 2027 that will no longer be in existence because of the AI and because of the machine learning. And interestingly, this is around things like accounts, admin, payroll, excuse me, and those executive or PA assistant roles. And I guess when it comes to us thinking about how do we manage our hiring managers, and the reason that I wanted to just sort of start talking through some of this data is that, interestingly, one of the quickest ways to gather the credibility, one of the quickest ways to develop relationships is to have the data insights and is to be able to talk at a much wider and a much higher level with our hiring managers. So I guess I think Thelma's also just popped that the link to the WEF report. Hopefully that's gone into chat so that you can also grab the link. So in terms of the number of hiring managers, somewhere between 11 and 25 comes up first, and then somewhere between 1 and 10. So we're definitely in the double digits. Sorry, yeah, we're definitely in the double digits there. So my final question then, I guess really to kick this off, and this is always a risk, right, when you're running a webinar. I've decided not to go slide by slide because actually it's not what I do in the classroom. So why would I do it on a webinar? What we're going to look at is actually what's priority for the audience this morning. So what do you want answered? And I guess this is about, what would make this the most useful and beneficial for your time. So across the next 45 minutes, what is priority for answering this morning? What do you want to talk about? Whether priority is influencing your hiring manager's mindset around the perfect candidate. So this piece about how do we educate and make sure that our hiring managers are not looking for this paper perfect candidate. How do we help them to see over and above the words that are on a page effectively of a CV? What's the best way to challenge a hiring manager? So how do we manage the hiring manager during a conversation? How do we challenge them? How do we really get them to understand what's going on in the market? How do we create partnerships with our hiring managers and our stakeholders? So how do we become seen as a business partner in the same way that HR are seen as business partners? How do we create that credibility? How do we navigate conversations with our hiring managers? So how do we, with a challenging hiring manager, how do we hold on during the conversation? How do we maintain relationship, and how do we keep them invested in our communication? Or is it about how to enhance communication and collaboration between talent acquisition and hiring managers? So over to you, really. And as I said, always a risky strategy because we certainly won't be going screen by screen. So over to you. So if you wouldn't mind just launching that poll for me, and we can get some feedback on that so that we can head straight into our priorities for the morning. And just as you do that, I will make a note so that Amy and I can head straight to the priority. And I'm just going to have a quick look at our chat. Right, so we have loaded the World Economic Forum. Okay, And interestingly, Kate's saying, look, one of the challenges we have is we no longer offer the hybrid working solution. And that's something, Kate, that I've seen and come across now on a number of occasions. So yeah, I can see that. Dan's saying, look, it's articulating to hiring managers current trends and how they impact our hiring needs. What else have we got here? Okay, so let's see what comes back on the priority for answering. Let's see what we get. Okay, so it looks as though priority for answering in the first instance is around influencing the hiring manager around the perfect candidate. And then it looks as though we go to enhancing communication and collaboration. And then we've got an equal challenging the hiring manager and creating a relationship. Okay, so let's go firstly then, and we will try and get to all of these. We will see how we get on from a time point of view. So I guess one of the some key data again, just for us to think about, is that 63% of talent acquisition actually say that talent shortage is their biggest issue. 76% of hiring managers actually admit that attracting the right level of candidates is their greatest challenge. 75% of people won't take a role with a company that have a poor or difficult reputation. And actually, what we also know is that the best candidates are off the markets within 10 days of engaging in the market. So I'm going to take us to another key point, and that is just to think about that. Look, what we know is from the data and from the stats is that the number one reason that people are motivated to move roles is actually all around career opportunity. And I wonder how often our hiring managers are aware of this. I wonder how often our hiring managers really understand that actually people are moving and motivated to move in the market. The best talent is motivated to move due to the opportunities within an organization. I wonder how often hiring managers really understand that what we offer as an organization is key, and it's not actually about what we gain from that candidate. It's much more about what we offer to the market. So I'm going to take us to take us straight to influencing the hiring manager and really how we move away from the paper perfect candidate. So I guess, Amy, my question to you is, what's your experience in terms of how you encourage your team to manage hiring managers in this instance? So when we're in the position whereby hiring managers are looking for the paper perfect candidate, be it education, be it uni, be it previous employers, what's your kind of message that you tend to give to your team around this?
Again, I think it's just like you've obviously said already, it's highlighting to the hiring manager and getting them to understand the market and talk about why we understand obviously what they want to get them on side, but obviously then be able to educate them around the market. So obviously we can talk about, there's obviously 5 million roles advertised daily on Indeed, which has facts and figures like that. Hiring managers haven't got the time, who I've dealt with, to be delving deeper into these kind of things, and they just assume that we've got this machine or an AI that never say never, but we can build that perfect, we'll find that perfect person, and we know they're not out there. So yeah, it's just, I find it's getting to know exactly what they want from a candidate, well, from a hiring manager's perspective, what they actually want and what they actually need. And then just going through it that way. So how we do it is we take our vacancy brief from the start, find out the ins and outs, go into real good detail, especially for them niche roles when they think they're 10 a penny, when really it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, or again, they don't exist. And yeah, just getting that hiring manager in that fixed mindset, and that we can find the candidate, but what they exactly need sometimes doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And I want to, going back a couple of sentences, it's interesting that you mentioned the role brief in every instance. That's interesting. So what's within the role brief that helps you to, I guess, have the hiring manager understand a bit more about what they need?
So with our role brief, we have a few obviously main questions, as in the skill set, what is it that they're looking for, as in maybe what packages they've used before, whether it's computer package or knowledge or experience that they've had maybe from previous companies. It's just trying to get as much detail as possible we can out of them to try and find that person. again, it can be difficult, but hiring managers love a question. They love talking about their roles. Well, from my experience, that's what I find. They love talking about the jobs. So the more questions you ask them, the better understanding. And again, they're going to have more confidence in you when asking them questions.
Absolutely. And I guess that this piece around having this standardized series of questions to ask at the very beginning of taking down the role, so that we're not making any assumptions, so that hiring managers don't think that we can just recruit using an internal job spec or an internal person profile, or even based on the last person that's just exited the business, right? That actually what we've got is a standardized tool and standardized documentation to be able to take the role, to be able to really have the hiring manager discuss with us exactly what it is they're looking for, so that we can really establish a difference between what they want and what they need. And I guess one of the things that we know, certainly from the stats and from the data, is that if it's the case that hiring managers are primarily looking at a specific skill or a specific experience, what we know is, and there's some really interesting research actually that was done by a company called Leadership IQ, and they tracked 20,000 hires, and 20,000 hires based on this experience alone piece. And what they found is that 46% of those hires didn't actually work out within 18 months. And interestingly, actually the reason that they didn't work out was actually mainly based on reasons of attitude, things like resistance to coaching, things like poor emotional intelligence, things like lack of motivation or suitability around the company culture. And so what we know is that in terms of influencing the hiring manager around the perfect candidate, we've got to be in a position whereby we've got some strategies to take with us to the initial meeting to really be able to hold the conversation and create credibility. And one of the things actually, Amy, that you mentioned is, look, in the first instance, I just understand from the hiring manager's perspective, what is it that they want? So I guess I'm interested to know, and I know, having met your team, that you've got some very experienced and you've also got some less experienced for talent acquisition. So I'm interested to know, when you're talking to those individuals, what do you try and get them to understand from the hiring manager's perspective?
It's basically, so we want to, what we want to do is have that standardized thing across the board. So regardless of whoever the hiring manager is talking to, maybe 1 week they could speak to one, in a couple of months they could be speaking to another advisor. So it's about having that standardization so that whoever they're talking to, they get that same experience. So again, they have that confidence within the resourcing team that we will find them that person. It's sometimes challenging, but I believe that if we come across confident in knowing what we're talking about, then that hiring manager will have that confidence as well.
Absolutely. So I guess it's about having the hiring manager maybe recognize the actual skills they need versus the qualifications that they think they need, and actually arriving with some data insight around that and some examples, right? Some stories from around the business. I'm sure every single person who's listening the other end has got stories, they've got narratives, they've got examples, they've got experiences of whereby they've recruited an individual who wasn't paper perfect, but actually has worked out brilliantly within the business. And I think it's very easy to arrive at our hiring managers' conversations and arrive when we're taking down the role and not having these stories actually with us. And what we need to do really is pitch up with these stories to really start the conversation around, listen, here's the credentials. Actually, here's some examples in other areas of the business and other domains whereby we've recruited not exactly what the hiring manager thought they were looking for, but now look at the impact on the business, look at the value proposition, and look at the headroom piece as well, right? There's plenty of data out there that tells us that actually the ideal candidate shouldn't be arriving with every skill or every ability or every piece of experience. In fact, there should be 25% of headroom just for them to be able to grow in the role. So a lot of this is around harnessing the conversation with the hiring manager to really have them look out of that whole kind of tunnel vision. I also think there's this important piece about highlighting transferable skills, right? So really highlighting what a transferable skill might be. And I think when we think about internal mobility, when we think about velocity, when we think about hiring against larger numbers, we have to be able to hold a conversation with the hiring manager around recruiting for skills that can be transferable. And I'm wondering, Amy, I see your team go out on all sorts of visits with across the supply chain, and I'm wondering if they've found their feet in terms of being able to talk to hiring managers around transferable skills. I'm thinking about the people that I see on LinkedIn and those that I've been in the classroom with. Have they found their feet now in terms of gently persuading hiring managers that actually transferable skills are one of the ways forward?
Most definitely, yeah. The difference that we've seen, I mean, we hold a poll, which we call a Net Promoter Score, an NPS, which is basically a survey that goes out to all the hiring managers. And from this time last year, from when we held it to this time after the training, our scoring actually went up by 51 points, which was massive across the business. It was across DHL Global, we were the highest improved business unit, which was absolutely amazing. And the confidence and the difference you see now, what I do see within my team, especially with regards to pushing back with them hiring managers, challenging them a bit more, having that confidence again, so they know what they're talking about, they understand the market, they've got the facts, they've got the figures, that type of thing. Yeah, it's been amazing, a big difference.
And isn't it interesting that by just having our TAs, all our talent acquisition want to do, and I'm sure it's the same the other end of the chat, all we want to do is a good job, right? All we want to do is find the person and make the hiring manager happy, right? But actually, to do that takes an awful lot of work to do it. And I think what certainly the work that we did was to build a bit of a framework. So we did things like making sure that we were listening and empathizing to our hiring manager, really taking some time to understand the role. So what is a typical day in the role? And not actually assuming that we understand it, actually having our hiring manager and really creating this engaging conversation to have them walk us through a typical day in the role. So what we're not doing is matching to kind of these bullet points that have lived on a job description for, I don't know, I'm sure, and I'll ask the question in the chat, but do you find that you've got job descriptions you're matching to that are out of date? Do you find that you're matching to criteria that's maybe been around for 8, 9, 10 years? And actually lots of the role criteria is no longer really relevant. So I'll leave that in the chat for you to think about. We also made sure that we really highlighted this piece about having a narrative and having experiences around our transferable skills. So being able to identify what might be transferable skills. And yeah, so Brucine Francis is saying, yep, most of our JDs are out of date. You're not alone. This is, you're certainly not alone. This is absolutely one of the challenges that we also see within that TA. Being able to showcase things like potential and adaptability. So being confident enough as a TA when we're sat with our hiring manager to be in a position to really walk a hiring manager through a candidate's previous experience, through their skill set and why they're transferable, not just pinging off a CV and hoping that the hiring manager looks at the CV and engages in it, really being confident enough to walk the hiring manager through the skill set of the candidate over the phone or on a Teams call. I think there's also this piece, again, around really being able to challenge the hiring manager when it comes to what they're looking for. Oftentimes, and again, I'll ask the question in the chat, but how many times do you find that your hiring managers are actually looking for a carbon copy of what they've just had? Carbon copy of the person who's just done a great job. The person who's exiting, or they've got somebody, yeah. And again, Brucine is saying, look, 99.9% of the time they're after this carbon copy. And I don't know, Amy, I could see you smiling there. Is that something that you found has been a challenge for your team on occasion?
Yeah, most definitely. Oh, yeah. And it still happens, but it's just educating them. Like you said, we can find that person. They don't necessarily have to have all the skills that they have on that role profile or vacancy profile. There is someone out there, and there isn't that perfect person, but you can build on that whoever the successful candidate is to be that perfect person. So yeah, we do experience it.
And Lakshmi's saying about affinity bias, absolutely, such a common challenge faced by recruiters. We're often asked to find just like me. And actually, isn't it interesting that the unconscious bias falls into place very often such a challenge with that affinity bias. We want somebody just like us, or we want somebody who is just like the person that we've recruited. And I think, again, this is where TA, and my hope is that I've got a slide on this. Let's just make sure. Yeah. So when it comes to diversity, I think this is so important. You know, we know that there are unconscious biases out there, but it's so important that as a TA, when we're having conversations with our hiring managers around what they're looking for, that we've actually got the stats in front of us, that we're in a position whereby we can talk to our hiring managers around the diversity case. And I'm aware actually that IHR very recently had their D&I conference. But I think what's interesting, I'm sure that you took loads of stats from that, but what's interesting is that if you don't have the stats at the moment, you haven't got a bank of them, let me give you some stats now. You can make a note of them and you'll have them for today. Interestingly, what we know is that diverse organizations are 70% more likely to capture new markets. So again, if you need a stat, if you need some data insight, if you need to make sure that hiring managers are in a position whereby they've got this data, here it is. Gender diverse and ethnically diverse companies are more likely to outperform industry norms by 25% and 36% respectively. I can see Louise Keegan's just saying, look, clarifying the risk of hiring managers making up their own process or missing steps and not following set processes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think Amy and I were going to talk to that point in a minute, this whole piece about consistency, right? That every single time the hiring manager is in receipt of a consistent service from you. And back to these stats, 77% of adults actually consider a company's culture before they apply for a job there. So 77% of adults are considering a culture. 54% of employees will leave organizations because they don't feel valued by their manager. And 51% of employees leave organizations because they don't feel this sense of belonging at work. And I know Amy, DHL have done a lot of work around the belonging piece with DE&I. And interestingly, I think that there's a real case when we're talking to our hiring managers, if they've got a fixed mindset, if they've got a fixed idea in terms of the who and the what they want to recruit, this again is whereby we can challenge. Jess is just saying, can you confirm these stats, the source of these stats? Yes, I can, Jess, and I will make sure that when we follow up on the webinar, I will make sure that I send to you where the stats have come from. That's not a problem at all. And so I think it's interesting that when we think about the fixed mindset of the perfect candidate, that we also make sure that we ask the hiring manager what's going to make sure that any individual that joins their team can belong. You know, have they thought about, if we're always looking to recruit the same type of individual, have they really thought about what belonging might look like? Because again, this is just pushing the boundaries. This is just pushing how they perceive and what their thoughts are in terms of the ideal person, the paper perfect person to recruit. And I think we see examples of this all the time, right? Around education, around the universities that hiring managers may want people to have come from. You know, this piece about they've got to be the Russell Group unis. Well, you know, that went out with the ARC. And again, I think as far as the AI goes, hopefully, and I will just ask the question actually, in terms of being in receipt of CVs or sending hiring managers CVs, how, and just really a yes or no, do you strip away the education piece on CVs before they go through to hiring managers? And again, Amy, I'll ask you the question. Do your hiring managers, are they in receipt of the unis that your candidates may have been educated at?
They have visibility of it, but when it comes to the pre-screening, it's not something we go over. It's more about experience, what people have done, what they're currently doing, that type of thing. Generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Much more about the person. And Kate Proctor saying, look, our hiring managers are really fussy over grades, even back to GCSEs. And again, I think that's interesting that the education piece, that there is a need to push back on it. And Emma's saying, yeah, but that's quite tricky when you're recruiting for graduate schemes. And I think that's it. But again, I think to both Kate and Emma's point, it is about being in a position whereby we can deliver the stats. So think about social mobility. You know, if we're really keen on social mobility as an organization, actually, what are we doing to encourage that? What's our TA process doing to encourage the social mobility piece? Think again about really being able to push back to hiring managers and give experiences, give information, give examples of whereby we've taken individuals into the organisation that don't have the exact GCSEs that maybe they're looking for. Brucine is saying, look, we look at non-Russell groups all the time for diversity. Sam is saying that our hiring managers have visibility of education, but we actively encourage not to view it unless it's specifically necessary. So I think it's interesting that these same challenges still exist, but actually the role of TA at this point and really being in a position, which I think answered the first question, is removing the need for the paper perfect candidate. The real need here is to be able to push back with examples and business examples. So sometimes there is a need, I think, to go back through and look at your stats. And interestingly, Kate's also saying that you know, sometimes for analytical roles this is easier, but we've actually struggled when it comes to the lower level grades, and that has then set a precedent going forward. Okay, so again, I think that's interesting. There is a pushback point there. There is a need to look wider, and just again to specifically be able to convince hiring managers that actually that the grades don't need to be exactly as they think they needed to be years ago. That World Economic Forum report, interestingly, that I think went into the chat earlier. Can you just confirm that it did go into the chat, Thelma? I think it did. Just give me a thumbs up if it went in. But I think what's interesting there is that that's also got some data and some stats that you can pull through. And don't get me wrong, there's like over 60 pages of it. But if you go through, I think, again, it's really interesting that we have to be able to focus on the we have to be able to focus on the skill set, and we have to be able to focus on those transferable skills, particularly when we are so short in terms of the available and the talent that's out there. So thank you for that, Thelma. You've just uploaded that again. Thank you. So I think our second, and goodness me, doesn't our time just go super quickly on these calls? But I think the next highest priority was actually enhancing communication and collaboration with our hiring managers. So I know that this is something, where are we? Okay. Whoop, there we go. So I think in terms of enhancing communication and collaboration with our hiring managers, this is something that we all work on every day. But Amy, I was going to ask you, I know that you work with a variety of hiring managers, some very experienced who have very fixed mindsets, some who are new and are more easily molded, shall we say. I'm interested to know, when you're encouraging your team, when they are challenged by hiring managers, what are kind of the processes that you fall back on to have them feel more confident in the collaboration piece? What are some of the things that you encourage them to do?
Again, just going back to we always, whenever we have a vacancy, even if we've had it before, 6 months before, go through that vacancy, take that verbal brief for each role. But a big thing that I've always found is a massive success, even when I was in my agency days, is go to site, go and see that hiring manager, book a time in the diary to go and meet with them, let them show you around their site, have a tour, and then see them face to face. Obviously, we've got that luxury back again, whereas obviously previously we didn't for a little while. Sit down with them, get to know them, understand their challenges as well on site. You understand the environment. Again, explain to them that you want to understand the environment that the person's going to be working in, so then it's easier to sell the job. If you explain all this to the hiring manager, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be on board with it. They want to show you their work environment. They want to show you their challenges, because then they feel like they're sharing it. So it just all helps building that rapport with the hiring manager.
All helps building that rapport, and actually going out on site, if we can, is the perfect way to build rapport, and also to create this sense that we're partners, right? That we communicate, that we collaborate. I think something that we talked about with your team, and in fact the wider team with DHL last year, was about maybe booking a room and actually being on site all day, right? If we're going to go out on site, let's go out. Let's go out on site all day. Let's be there. Let's be present. Let's have meetings. Let's work from site, but let's also be present for questions. Let's be present for what's going on. And I think that, coupled with really establishing from the very beginning, when we take down roles with our hiring manager, some clear expectations. So this piece about what's the responsibilities across both parties. So the collaboration pieces, the responsibility is not just on us to recruit, right? There's a responsibility piece between both TA and hiring manager. And Amy, I think some of the work that had already been done was about the responsibilities matrix, the document that we take out to hiring managers to say, great, hey, here's what we will do during the process, and here's what you need to do during the process. So this really clear piece of communication to set the expectations. And I'm wondering, what was the feedback on that in terms of your hiring managers and your manager base?
It was like a new invention for us. Yeah, they still have them now. More so, obviously, thinking of the environment on our saved to our laptops, but we still have them to hand as well, laminated. And it just gives them, the hiring manager, that guidance and that understanding of our process, because we can talk and talk and talk about a process, but I think if they've got it there as well in front of them, they understand it, or for whatever reason, if they're expecting something from a TA, but then obviously they haven't heard, and or something's been waylaid, they can look at this process and understand, oh yeah, I should be doing that, or they could be chasing the TA for whatever reason. But yeah, having that standard process has been a massive help, and understanding from both sides where the responsibilities lie. Yeah, it's been huge.
And I guess it just opens up this line of communication, doesn't it? This piece whereby as TA, we don't assume that hiring managers understand their responsibilities, and vice versa. And I think what's also interesting is something that certainly DHL were interested in doing, was really increasing hiring velocity, right? So although the main metric is not necessarily around time to hire or time to fill, one of the metrics was and one of the ways that the training was going to be measured was around actually what was the increase in terms of time to hire and time to fill. And part of the work that we did during training was not only the responsibilities matrix, so being very clear with our communication in terms of who has responsibility for what, but also to implement ahead of time. So ahead of even advertising the role, ahead of being in any position to work with candidates around the role or pipelining, was actually about scheduling regular meetings with the hiring manager. And we talked very much about ensuring that there were five-day kind of turnaround across each role. So there was a change in status. So in as much as regularly and already scheduling ahead interviews prior to advertising the role, scheduling ahead feedback sessions, scheduling ahead second interviews, scheduling ahead going on site as a TA to look at the environment, so that we're in a position whereby we could really increase that hiring velocity, right? We could really increase the speed of bringing people in. And I'm wondering, what did you find, Amy? What was the overall outcome of that? Because I think we're now kind of 6-7 months later. What was the outcome and the impact of that strategy?
Most definitely, obviously, our time to hire fell considerably by 6 days after, which was massive for us because that was a big challenge. So yeah, time to hire. Obviously, presence on site is just, you can guarantee that most sites now daily there's some advisor, or even myself, I go down as well, just to sit, work there for the day. People were visible to on site, so they see us. That whole building that rapport with not just the hiring manager but the site as well, other colleagues. It's definitely helped. It's not massive things, it's just little things, and it all builds up. And yeah, we've seen a huge change in regards to relationships for site.
And I think that I think we were on 56 days time to hire prior to the training. And what were you on as of last week in terms of number of days time to hire?
So time to hire now, we're down to 10.
Yeah. Huge. And it's interesting, and it's interesting, isn't it? And one of the questions actually Lakshmi has got is, look, recruitment is a joint responsibility between TA teams and the business. How do you drive collaborative hiring between TA partners and hiring managers? So And that says in your organisation. So I'm assuming, Lakshmi, that is a question for Amy as opposed to one for me. I'm very happy to answer, but if Amy wants some time just to think about examples. But I think what's interesting is in terms of driving collaboration, this all comes down to communication. So this comes down to that initial communication piece when the role is first loaded onto the system, when it's first given its PO number, when it's first entered onto the system. This now comes down to the collaboration piece, right? So it comes down to the communication piece. So in the first instance, it's us as TAs, firstly, creating credibility. So introducing ourselves to that hiring manager, making sure they understand our background, making sure they understand our skill sets, that they understand the expectations between two parties, and that we really set the scene. We set the scene between TA and hiring managers. So the hiring manager has a very clear understanding in terms of what the timelines will look like, what the challenges might be, what the data is in terms of what's going on around them in the local market, but also the wider market, and that the hiring manager has an understanding of how we operate. And Amy, I don't know if you wanted to add to that, because I think that it's really all about the communication with the hiring manager and really creating this relationship and this rapport with them where they understand exactly the skill sets that we can recruit for and what to expect from TA. But over to you, Amy, in terms of what you would add to that or how you would echo that.
Yeah, definitely echo it. Again, it's just about building, we found, the rapport with the hiring manager, having that understanding again from the very beginning when you receive that role that's come through, understanding what their needs are, going to site, discussing the role with them. I don't know if you guys have it or not. I've got a barking dog. Bear with me one moment.
Okay, that's no problem. So as Amy is dealing with that, so there's another question that's just come through from Emma. Interested to know if you calculate time to hire from job being advertised to offer being made, usually time to fill, or date candidate entered the pipeline to offer being accepted. So I will let Amy answer that one. So that question there from Emma, interested to know if you calculate time to hire from job being advertised to offer made, or date candidate entered the pipeline to offer being accepted.
I'm back now. Sorry about that. So we have time to hire. So time to hire is from when the role is assigned to the recruiter, TA, to when we go to offer. But then we have the time to fill. So time to fill is from when the hiring manager gets authorization from that vacancy to when we close the vacancy down.
Got it. Emma, does that answer your question? You can just give me a thumbs up if you're happy with that, or if not, then we can go back to it. So what other questions do we have? Emma says sort of. Fine, Emma, we can talk again. That's no problem. Okay. So what other questions do we have at the moment? Again, I'm just going to go back to the piece around actually communicating and collaborating with hiring managers, and back to some of the, I guess, the blueprint for doing this. In the first instance, what we need to have as a TA team is we really need to be in a position whereby we've actually got the same, we decide on the standard that we want to set for all of our hiring managers. And what I mean by that is, what's our process? What are we going to do with every single hiring manager every single time a new role comes in? And the work that we did with DHL and Amy's wider team, of which I think there's something like up to, have you got something like 70 recruiters in your team for supply chain in the UK and Ireland?
Yeah, we're 71 now.
Okay. So some of the work that we did was really about looking at, okay, what are the fundamentals, what's our approach going to be, and how we're going to make sure that we have a streamlined approach. So that was everything from the role and responsibilities, so the responsibilities matrix between TA and hiring manager. We then looked at the SLA. So are we visual with our SLA? Are we making sure that our hiring managers have seen our SLA, and do they understand what that means? because again, the SLA helps the hiring managers to understand what the timing responsibilities might be on both sides. We also then looked at having, and again, Readying Recruiters supplies this as a nudge document for all recruiters so that we're in a position whereby we can have hiring managers really see that we are taking down the information on a very specific and almost a forensic level. So we're in a position to be able to take down the information very carefully. And then what we do is we make sure that on a timing basis that we've really structured the timeline. So we're in a position whereby every 5 days we see a change in vacancy status. And all of that is done via conversations with the hiring managers, and all of it is done by providing insights and knowledge so that we can be really credible and work as partners with our hiring managers. And I don't know, Amy, if you would add anything to that in terms of in terms of either that question or in terms of your overall thoughts on the training that was delivered.
Yeah, I just think, because obviously a lot of our team, from when I started, there was 24 of us 5 years ago, and obviously now there's 71. And a lot of them were recruited through the pandemic, so they all were working from home. So everyone was collaboratively and were working the same, has made a big difference to us with them at site around the obviously supply chain region.